Welcome. Tonight, we travel back to a time when gods walked among mortals, and heroes faced impossible challenges. A time of legends, strength, and courage. We'll follow the story of Heracles, a man who became a hero through trials, battles, and heart. This story isn't just about mighty feats. It's about facing fears, making mistakes, and rising again. So find your cozy spot, let the gentle rain sounds soothe your mind, and let's begin this timeless journey together. Before the world was full of gods in golden thrones and mortals dreaming under olive trees, there was a woman, and a lie. Her name was Alcmene. She lived in Thebes, a mortal woman with kindness in her heart and courage in her bones. She was married to a good man named Amphitryon, a warrior respected among his people. But this isn't really Amphitryon's story. This story belongs to the son who would one day carry a lion on his back and a world on his shoulders. Zeus, the king of the gods, saw Alcmene from high above, and being Zeus impulsive, mighty, and often terribly selfish, he couldn't resist. One night, while Amphitryon was away at war, Zeus disguised himself as her husband. The sky was calm, the air was still, and in that quiet moment, a god planted the seed of a child who would not belong entirely to heaven or earth. When Alcmene gave birth, she didn't know the chaos she'd brought into the world. She named the boy Alcides, but he wouldn't carry that name forever. Hera, Zeus's wife, was watching. She always was. And when she learned of her husband's newest betrayal, her fury crackled like thunder over Mount Olympus. She looked down upon that baby, so small, so unaware of the war already swirling around him, and she made a promise. If she couldn't destroy Zeus, she'd destroy what he loved. Slowly, deeply, over a lifetime, the child, still wrapped in soft linen, slept peacefully. He had no idea that from the moment he took his first breath, he was being hunted. When the baby was only months old, Hera sent 2 serpents into his cradle. Long, thick, slithering beasts with eyes like fire. They glided toward him in silence, fangs ready. But before anyone could scream or run, the child sat up, reached out with those tiny fists, and strangled both snakes as if they were no more, threatening than garden vines. His parents stared in silence. This was no ordinary boy. Years passed. The boy grew into a young man with broad shoulders and quiet eyes. He was strong, frighteningly so, but he wasn't cruel. He helped build homes, dug wells, lifted wagons stuck in mud. People admired him, even feared him a little. He was kind, but his strength set him apart. Like a river that carves through stone simply by being itself. The name Alcides faded. Now, people called him Heracles, meaning glory of Hera, a bitter name chosen to appease the goddess whose anger never wavered. Still, Heracles tried to live a quiet life. He married a beautiful woman named Megara. They had children, a home, laughter around the fire. For a moment, it seemed like Hera had forgotten him. But gods don't forget. One day, Hera clouded his mind. A mist fell over him, not a physical fog, but something worse. He didn't see his wife. He didn't hear his children. All he saw were enemies, monsters in his home. In a haze of madness, Heracles did something no hero should ever do, and when the fog lifted, he was left with blood on his hands and silence all around him. He fell to his knees. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He went to the oracle of Delphi and asked what he must do to cleanse himself, to make it right. The gods gave him one word: labors. He must serve King Eurystheus of Tiryns and do whatever was asked, no matter how terrible, matter how long. And so began the labors, not just tests of strength, but trials of soul. Heracles didn't just battle beasts, he battled grief, guilt, the weight of being more than human, yet too human to escape pain. Heracles arrived at the court of King Eurystheus, who sat upon a throne carved more from ego than stone. The king wasn't a brave man, not really. But when he heard the oracle had sent Heracles to serve him, he grinned the way a child does when handed power too heavy for his hands. He rubbed his soft fingers together and decided this strong man would be sent to die. His first order: go, Eurystheus said to the hills of Nemea. There lives a lion who cannot be killed. Its skin is harder than bronze. Its claws are sharper than any blade. Kill it, bring me its hide. He smirked. He thought he had signed Heracles' death warrant, so Heracles walked no chariot, no horses, just the wind and the dirt and the sound of his own sandals on stone. As he crossed the valleys toward Nemea, villagers whispered about the beast. It had taken sons, daughters, entire herds of goats. Arrows bounced off it like rain. Swords snapped. Traps shattered. But Heracles didn't flinch. When he reached the hills, they were quiet. No birds, no rustle of animals, just the hush of fear. And then, from between two rocks, it came, the lion dot. It was enormous, the color of dark gold, its mane thick and wild, like it had been carved from storms, and its eyes, they didn't burn like Hera's, they didn't blaze with rage. They were cold, patient, as if it already knew how this would end. Heracles tried arrows first. They bounced off. He tried his sword. It bent dot, so he did the unthinkable. He dropped his weapons. He stepped toward the lion with nothing but his bare hands. The lion roared and charged, and the two met in a cloud of dust and muscle and fury. Heracles didn't try to outmatch it. He let it wear itself down. He moved with it, waited for a moment, then grabbed it by the throat. They wrestled, like two storms colliding. And when it was done, Heracles stood. The lion did not. But its hide, oh, that hide. Nothing could pierce it, not even after death. So Heracles did something clever. He took one of the lion's own claws and used it to skin the beast. From then on, he wore that pelt like armor, thick, golden, and silent. A trophy, a shield, a reminder He returned to Eurystheus, the lion's hide draped over his shoulders, blood dried on his arms. Eurystheus was horrified. He had expected bones, maybe a shredded tunic. Not this. The king scrambled behind a bronze jar, a giant pot where he could hide when Heracles came too close. From that day forward, he gave all orders from a safe distance, shouting instructions through trembling lips. But Heracles didn't laugh. He didn't mock. He simply bowed his head and waited for the next task, because he wasn't doing this for glory, or revenge, or anyone else's praise. He was trying to wash himself clean, and the stain didn't fade after one battle. King Eurystheus, still shaken by Heracles' survival, summoned him again, this time from behind the safety of his giant bronze jar. "There's a creature," he stammered, "a serpent, near the swamp of Lerna, a beast with 9 heads. One of them is immortal. The others grow back when cut. Go, kill it." It sounded more like a wish than a command. Eurystheus wasn't trying to test Heracles, he was trying to end him. So again, Heracles walked through thick forests and sun-baked hills, toward the cursed marshes where even birds wouldn't fly too low. The swamp of Lerna wasn't like any other land. The air there felt heavy, like every breath was filtered through grief. The ground sucked at his feet. The water didn't move, and somewhere beneath it all, there was a hiss, low, echoing. He knew he wasn't alone. The Lernian Hydra didn't roar. It didn't snarl like the lion. It waited. 9 heads rose from the muck, one after the other. Their eyes glowed dull red, like embers that refused to die. Each neck moved like it had a mind of its own, twisting, twitching, hunting. The middle head, the one that didn't blink, was bigger than the rest. That was the immortal one. Heracles stepped forward, torch in one hand, sword in the other. The first head lunged. He cut it clean off and watched, stunned, as 2 more grew in its place. The Hydra hissed louder now. It surged forward, heads snapping like whips, teeth gleaming. Heracles fought back, slashing and dodging, but every head he cut became 2 more. It was like fighting fire with dry leaves. He couldn't win this alone, so he called for his nephew, Ioela Ness. Now Iolaus wasn't a warrior like Heracles, but he was sharp, brave in his own quiet way. As Heracles swung his blade, Iolaus held a torch to the stumps, burning them shut before new heads could grow. One by one they closed off, the monster's fury, until only the immortal head remained. Heracles didn't hesitate. He grabbed a massive boulder, pinned the last head beneath it, and buried it deep into the earth. It thrashed, screamed, but it could not escape. When it was done, the swamp was quiet again. The sky lightened, and Heracles stood, muddy, bleeding, but undefeated. He returned to Eurystheus, but this time the king shook his head. "You had help," he said. "That labor doesn't count." Heracles didn't argue. He didn't protest. He simply nodded. and waited for the next one, because redemption, real redemption, doesn't come from the approval of kings. It comes from the battles you keep fighting, even when no one is watching, even when someone says, that didn't count. Not all monsters roar. Some wear silence like a cloak. Some don't need claws or poison or the bite of flame. Sometimes the hardest labors come not from violence, but from patience. And that's exactly what Heracles faced next. When Heracles returned to King Eurystheus, expecting a new test of strength or terror, the king leaned from his hiding place and said, "Bring me the Ceryneian hind, now." This wasn't a beast of war or shadows. The hind was a deer with golden antlers and hooves of bronze, sacred to Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, divine, untouchable. The catch, Heracles couldn't hurt it. Not a scratch, if he laid a finger on it the wrong way, he'd risk the wrath of a goddess. And if you know anything about Artemis, she didn't forgive lightly, so Heracles didn't take up his club. He took his silence and followed the deer for a year. Yes, a full year he trailed it through forests, so quiet you could hear pine needles fall, across rivers that never froze, through meadows that glowed silver beneath moonlight. He slept little, ate less, and the deer always stayed just out of reach. But Heracles was patient. Not every enemy is defeated by force. One morning, the deer paused at a stream. The sun hadn't fully risen. The light was soft, like a held breath, and Heracles moved, not with thunder, but with grace. He loosed an arrow beside the deer, startling it, just enough for it to stumble. And in that breathless moment, he caught it, gently cradling the sacred creature as if it were made of starlight as he carried the hind back. Artemis appeared, silent, eyes sharp. "You touch what is mine," she said. And yet the deer breathes. Heracles knelt. He didn't offer excuses. He only said, "I do this not for glory, not for pride, but because I must." And Artemis saw the truth in his eyes. She let him go, but only if he returned the hind. Untouched, so Heracles brought the deer to Eurystheus. And when the king came out to claim it, Heracles let the deer loose, with a blur of golden antlers and bronze hooves. The hind vanished into the wild. Eurystheus shouted, screamed, demanded it be retrieved. But Heracles just stood there, still calm, because he had completed the labor without spilling blood, without taking life. Strength isn't always measured in how hard you hit. Sometimes it's in how softly you hold something you don't understand. After a year of chasing silence and gold-tipped hooves, Heracles was ready for something with a little more teeth. And the next labor, it had plenty of that. "The Erymanthian boar," said King Eurystheus, barely peeking out from his bronze hiding jar. "Bring it back, alive." Double quotes now. This beast was not sacred, not divine, just angry, big and angry. It lived on Mount Erymanth, a place thick with fog, rocks, and old bones. Hunters told stories of the boar's tusks, long as scythes, sharp as truth. They said it could gut a man before his heart even knew it stopped. Heracles set off into the mountains, but before he reached the boar, he made a stop to visit an old friend, Pholus, a centaur. Now, centaurs weren't usually the cuddly kind, but Pholus was different, gentle, curious, the kind of soul who liked to ask questions. Instead of throwing punches, he welcomed Heracles with food, stories, warmth, and wine. Specifically, a sealed jar of wine made for all centaurs, sacred stuff. Heracles never wanted to care much for labels. Opened it, the scent wafted through the air like smoke, strong, sweet, irresistible, and it drew the other centaurs. Not for a party, for a fight. They stormed in, wild-eyed, hooves thundering. Chaos broke loose. Heracles defended himself, shooting. Arrows tipped with Hydra venom, the kind that never missed, never forgave. Many fell, including by terrible accident. Pholus. It was a moment that stung deeper than any wound. Not all victories felt like wins, but Heracles couldn't stay in sorrow. The boar still waited. He climbed higher, through frost and wind, until he reached the beast's den. And there it was, snorting, pouring eyes like molten stone. It charged. Heracles didn't flinch. He sidestepped, lured it uphill, higher, steeper, until the snow grew thick. The boar slipped, struggled, and with a well-timed lunge, Heracles tackled it, bound it in chains, lifted it over his shoulders like it weighed nothing but stubbornness when he returned. Eurystheus took one look at the creature, still alive, still snarling, and dove back into his jar. He shouted from inside, "Take it away, far away." Heracles chuckled. There's power in facing what everyone else hides from, and even more in carrying it, without letting it break you. Let's dive into one of Heracles' most unusual tasks. No beasts, no blood, no magical monsters, just a mess. A legendary, unforgettable mess. Not every labor is about strength. Some are about stink. When Heracles came back from wrangling the wild boar, muscles sore and heart heavy, King Eurystheus had something different in mind. "I want you," the king said with a smirk, "to clean the Augean stables." Heracles raised an eyebrow. "You want me to? What? Clean them?" Eurystheus, CACK, lead dot. Now, at first glance, that sounds simple, until you realize these stables belonged to King Augeas, a man with thousands of cattle, sacred cattle, immortal cattle, who never ever stopped eating. And you know what happens when animals eat? Exactly, these stables hadn't been cleaned in 30 years. Imagine that. Decades of muck, piled so high the sun couldn't shine through it. The smell. Let's not even go there. But Heracles didn't flinch. He took one look at the stables, the mountains of filth, the endless sludge, and got an idea. Not a heroic idea, not a noble, poetic idea, a clever one. He went to King Augeas and made a deal. If I clean the entire stable in one day, Heracles said, "You give me 1/10 of your cattle." Augeas laughed. "Sure, one day. Good luck." No one believed he could do it, but Heracles wasn't going to clean this with a sponge and bucket. He walked out to two nearby rivers, the Alpheus and the Peneus. With the swing of his club and the shift of some stones, he diverted their paths. Straight into the stables, the rivers roared in. They rushed through every stall, every corner, sweeping away decades of filth in a single thunderous current. By sunset, the stables were cleaner than they'd ever been. Augeas, of course, wasn't pleased. He'd made a deal and now regretted it. He tried to back out, said he'd been tricked. But everyone saw what Heracles had done. He didn't just use strength, he used his mind, and maybe that's what made it one of the most impressive labors of all. Because sometimes solving a problem isn't about brute force. Sometimes it's about looking at the mess and finding a smarter way to clean it. After the rivers swept through those horrid stables, Heracles found himself facing a whole new kind of problem. It wasn't a beast you could wrestle, or a mess you could wash away. This was a flock of birds, but not just any birds. The Stymphalian birds. They lived near Lake Stymphaleos, a dark, misty place full of reeds and shadows. And these birds, well, they were something else. They weren't pretty songbirds. They had sharp metal feathers, like little knives that could slice through armor. Their beaks were sharp enough to pierce a shield. And worst of all, they had a taste for trouble. They swooped down, pecking at farmers, tearing crops, and even attacking travelers. Nobody wanted to go near the lake. Heracles, though, he wasn't scared. He walked through the reeds and called on the help of Athena. The goddess gave him a special gift, a pair of bronze castanets. When Heracles clapped them, the sound echoed through the swamp like thunder. The birds, startled and confused, rose up into the sky, a wild, angry storm of feathers and beaks. Heracles didn't just watch. He fired arrows into the flock, each shot precise, sending feathers and metal clinking to the ground. One by one, the birds fell until the skies cleared and peace returned. The villagers cheered, and for the first time in years, the land around Lake Stymphaleos breathed easy. And Heracles, he learned something that day. Sometimes the wildest problems need a little help and a good plan. After sending the sharp-feathered birds packing, Heracles found himself sailing off to Crete, the island that smells of salt air and ancient secrets. Why? Because King Minos had a problem. A very big problem. A wild bull was rampaging all over the island. Not just any bull, but the Cretan bull. A massive, furious creature with hooves like thunder and eyes that burned with fire. This bull wasn't just wild. It was a symbol of Minos' power, a gift from the god Poseidon himself. But the bull had gone rogue, stomping fields, scaring villagers, and causing chaos. Minos wanted it gone. Heracles wasn't about to back down. When he arrived, he found the bull standing tall, muscles rippling, steam coming from its nostrils. Most people would run. Heracles, he stepped forward. He didn't fight the bull with a sword or spear. No, he used his bare hands. A struggle like this wasn't about weapons. It was about strength, will, and heart. The bull charged. Heracles dodged. The earth shook with a mighty grab. Heracles caught the bull's horns. The fight was long and fierce, like two forces of nature wrestling for control. Finally, Heracles held the bull down, whispering calm words to steady it. The beast, exhausted, gave in. Heracles led the bull back across the sea, alive but tamed. When he presented it to King Eurystheus, the king got scared, said, "Nope, you keep that one." Heracles didn't mind, because sometimes the hardest battles don't end with a fight, but with respect. Not all of Heracles' labors were about strength and smarts. Some were downright creepy. This next one takes us to Thrace, a land of wild forests and even wilder legends. Heracles was sent to capture the mares of Diomedes, for horses owned by King Diomedes, a man known for being as fierce as the beasts he kept. But these weren't ordinary horses. These mares had a terrible habit. They were man-eaters. Yeah, you heard right. They feasted on human flesh, terrorizing anyone nearby. Imagine a horse that wasn't just big and fast, but downright savage. Wild eyes flashing, teeth bared, and hunger that could never be satisfied. Heracles rode into Diomedes' land, knowing this wouldn't be easy. The first step, he had to find the horses. They were kept in a massive stable, guarded by fierce soldiers and wild dogs. Heracles fought his way through using his strength and wits, and finally stood before the mares now. How do you catch wild man-eating horses? Heracles' plan was simple but bold. He fed Diomedes himself to his own horses. Yeah, Diomedes. Fierce and cruel became the meal. With their master gone, the mares calmed. Heracles quickly harnessed them and began the journey back. It wasn't over yet, though. The mares were still dangerous. When Heracles delivered them to King Eurystheus, the king, true to form, was horrified. He set the mares free, hoping they'd cause trouble elsewhere, but Heracles knew better. In the end, he freed the mares, and they roamed wild, a reminder of the wildness that can't be tamed. Next, Heracles found himself journeying far away to the land of the fierce Amazons. These weren't your everyday warriors. The Amazons were a tribe of all women, fierce fighters who rode horses like the wind and wielded weapons with deadly skill. Their queen was Hippolyta, a woman known for both her strength and her honor. Heracles was sent to get her magical belt, a gift from the god Ares, the god of war. The belt wasn't just a fancy accessory. It was a symbol of power, strength, and leadership. Heracles sailed to the Amazon lands and met Hippolyta. She was impressed by his reputation, and for a while things went smoothly. She agreed to give Heracles the belt willingly, but, and you knew there'd be a but. Hera wasn't going to let this go quietly. Disguised, Hera stirred up trouble among the Amazons. making them suspicious of Heracles. Suddenly, what was meant to be a peaceful handover turned into a chaotic battle. Heracles fought bravely, and in the end, he secured the belt. But the cost, the loss of trust, and the reminder that even gods and heroes couldn't avoid Hera's wrath. It was a lesson in how even the strongest sometimes faced battles, not just with swords, but with suspicion and deceit. After his battle with the Amazons, Heracles had one of the most challenging tasks yet: to steal the cattle of Geryon. Geryon was no ordinary man. He was a giant with 3 heads and 3 sets of arms, living on the far edge of the world where the sun sets. His cattle were massive, shining red beasts that grazed in vast fields. To get these cattle, Heracles had to travel across deserts, mountains, and seas. The journey alone was tough. The sun beating down, sand blowing in his face, and the lonely silence of the far lands. When he finally reached Geryon's island, Heracles saw the giant guarding his herd with fierce dogs, 2-headed hounds that snarled and snapped. Without hesitation, Heracles fought. The battle was epic. With his great strength and clever tactics, he defeated Geryon and his dogs. He rounded up the cattle and began the long trek home. But the journey wasn't over. The sun was hot, the cattle restless, and the land unfamiliar. Heracles faced storms, wild beasts, and exhaustion. Still, his determination never wavered. When he finally brought the cattle back to King Eurystheus, the king was once again terrified. The labors were nearly complete, but Heracles knew the last challenge awaited. Heracles' final labor was something special and tricky. He was sent to retrieve the golden apples from the garden of the Hesperides. These weren't just any apples. They were magical, glowing with a golden light, and they belonged to the daughters of night, the Hesperides, who guarded the garden with fierce devotion. The garden itself was hidden far away, beyond mountains and seas, in a place where even the bravest dared not go. To make things harder, the garden was protected by a terrifying dragon named Lodon, a serpent with many heads, each one snapping and hissing. Heracles knew he couldn't just walk in and pick the apples. He had to find a way to get past the dragon and the guardians. One of the most famous parts of this story involves Heracles asking Atlas, the titan who holds the sky, for help. Heracles offered to hold the sky himself if Atlas would fetch the apples. Atlas agreed, but when he returned, he tried to leave Heracles holding the sky forever. Clever as ever, Heracles tricked Atlas into taking the sky back and made off with the apples. The story shows Heracles wasn't just muscle, he was smart. To dot the golden apples symbolized more than just beauty. They represented immortality and the power of the gods. By retrieving them, Heracles showed he was worthy of that power. And with this final task complete, Heracles' legendary labors were done. So, what's the big deal about Heracles? Why do we still tell his story thousands of years later? Heracles wasn't just muscles and battles. He was about the struggle to be better, to fight through hard times, and to prove that even when the world throws everything at you, you can still stand tall. His labors weren't just chores, they were tests of courage, strength, and spirit. Each task pushed him further, teaching lessons about patience, cleverness, and facing fear. His story shows us that heroes aren't perfect. Heracles made mistakes, he got angry, he suffered, but he kept going. And that's something we can all relate to. His adventures remind us that life isn't about never falling. It's about getting up every time and maybe, just maybe, finding a little humor and heart along the way. So next time you hear thunder rumbling in the distance, or see a brave person pushing through a tough day, remember Heracles, a hero who faced gods and monsters, a man who carried the weight of the world, and a legend whose story still inspires us all. And so, the story of Heracles comes to a close for now. A hero forged not just by strength, but by heart, courage, and the will to keep moving forward, no matter the odds. His labors remind us all that life's challenges can be faced with a steady hand and a hopeful spirit. Thank you for joining me on this journey through ancient myths, where gods and mortals intertwine, and where every story holds a lesson waiting to be discovered. As you settle in and the rain gently falls around you, let your thoughts drift softly, carried by the echoes of legends that never truly fade. Rest well, knowing that even heroes have their strength. In that, we find a little bit of ourselves. Good night.